Hello, hello, welcome back. Stephen Morris here with Advisory. Today we're going to dive into an interesting area and a little bit frustrating as well around code SB8, which is a statewide law that's in California and how it can potentially snarl your development plans in the future. Let's dive into what the outcomes might be in one city like Los Angeles versus another one in the state like San Diego. So I believe the old saying is, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And this particular law here, as you're going to see through the mechanics, is definitely one that had fantastic intentions to provide affordable housing, to provide low-income housing for folks who are on the low-income side of things. And actually what the results turned out to be, which is a huge roadblock in terms of future development opportunities in the state of California. So picture this. You find a wonderful development opportunity in the city of Los Angeles or San Francisco or San Diego, and it has a single family home that's vacant. Okay, and you're thinking in your head, great, I don't have to worry about demolishing the property because it's vacant, and as we all know that single family homes are immune from rent control under Costa-Hawkins. And so you go in there, you knock the building down, you start to go in for your building permits, and something happens. Something happens that's not going to be very good for your development outcome. And the city comes back and says, hey, who was living here in the past 5 or 10 years, depending on your situation? And you're thinking, what do I care who was living here in the past 5 or 10 years? When I got the property, it was vacant. I didn't kick anyone out of the building. It was delivered totally unoccupied. And the city comes back and says, we want to know. And if you can't tell us, we're going to assume that somebody who was on the low income side of things actually was living here, and when you replace that unit with a new building, you're going to have to replace it as an affordable unit, which means it's going to be able to only collect a low amount of income, or if you sell it, you can only sell it to a low-income buyer for a low-income price. So how does this all work out? We're going to dive into the mechanics. Essentially, back in 2021, the state passed a law called SB8, and the thrust of that law, generally speaking, was something along the lines of helping developers get through a plan check or through a particular process through entitlements. And basically, it said something along the lines of, hey, if you're a developer in a city and the city can only drag your project out over 5 hearings, and that includes taking you to court, and after the 5 hearings, they have to make a decision, and they're going to have to tell you, yeah, you can go forward with this project. And so we all thought, great, that sounds like a fantastic law. Sounds like it's only good for us developers here in terms of being able to provide more housing for the state. However, at the very tail end of the law, they added this little addendum here about replacement units. And the thrust of this area basically is that if you were to tear down a property that is considered to be a protected unit, you've got to replace it with another unit, presumably affordable, unless you can override or get over some certain presumptions. So in cities that are rent stabilized, for example, like Los Angeles, Santa Monica, Berkeley, San Francisco, Oakland, there's a few other cities in the state that have a rent stabilization ordinance. All the rent stabilized units, typically built before 1980, are going to be protected units. And these automatically are going to come back as affordable units if you tear down the property. But what about single family residences? You might be thinking, well, like we said, they're protected by Costa-Hawkins, and so they're never going to be subject to rent control, so we can tear those down with impunity. However, the law also introduces this concept of looking back over 5 years, and they'll say, great, you have this vacant building, you've got to prove to us, you have to basically prove a negative, that nobody was living here in the past 5 years. Nobody was living there in the past 5 years, and you have irrefutable proof, then you can tear it down without any consequences. However, if somebody was living there in the past 5 years, you've got to ascertain what their income level was. And if their income level was considered to be below 80% of the median average wage in the area, then when you demolish that unit and you rebuild whatever you're going to build, that unit is going to come back as affordable. And in the rental world, that means you basically collect little to no rents, so you're never going to be able to recoup the cost of your investment in the property. And if it's for sale, then you've got to offer it at a very low price. Again, might be even below the construction costs, which would not be a very good outcome for you. I want to emphasize, you have to pay attention to this law even in cities without a rent stabilization ordinance. San Diego is a fantastic example of one. So if you were to buy a single family residence that's zoned on a lot that you can put maybe 10 units by right, and it's units delivered vacant, you still need to ascertain as to whether or not there were tenants over the past 5 years and assess their income level to determine whether or not the units are going to come back as affordable. The question is, well, how do you prove what their income level is? Typically speaking, cities like local housing departments are going to want to see the tenant's tax returns, which is extremely problematic. As I'm sure you can imagine, if you go in to buy a vacant building and you find out there was a tenant 3 years ago in the property, and you manage to get their contact information, you call them, you say, hey, can I have your tax returns because I'm trying to build out a property? What do you think their response is going to be? Click, we're going to hang up. We're not going to talk to you. Or you might have to offer them a large sum of money. Hey, can I have a copy of your tax returns to show that you were over a certain income threshold? It's a big risk. And the thing is, you don't want to find this out after you've bought the property. You've got to figure this all out during due diligence. Otherwise, your project that looks like a home run might actually turn into a huge loss for you. And I don't want that to happen to you guys at all. We've experienced this when the law came out, and it was a very frustrating time to get through the city process around it. I strongly encourage you to spend the time, understand who is in the property, get utility records, get affirmations from the owner as to who was in the property over the past 5 years, and secure that part of your due diligence to ensure that you do not have this horrible negative outcome that's waiting for you on the other side of your development after all the hard work and everything that you've done to get there. One more thing, I also want you to be aware of the potential snarl around vacant land. What if you bought the property with vacant land on it? Guess what? The look-back period now goes 10 years because typically speaking, when you're removing properties from the rental market, you've got to do something called an Ellis removal of the property in the state of California to take it off the market. SB8 expands the look-back to a 10-year window, which means you've got to figure out who was living there over a very long period of time. Might be close to impossible, especially if the property has traded hands over the past 10 years. I should also mention that you have to offer those units, if it's considered to be a protected unit, back to those original tenants at their old rents. So I don't know what they were thinking when they did this. I'm assuming there were pro-tenant groups that were coming in and saying, we've got to help the poor out, and this is the way to do it. I've got to say, this is probably one of the worst laws that was ever passed. This is definitely anti-development. As we're talking through this, I'm sure you're thinking this is a highly illogical process, and it's actually going to produce exactly the opposite outcome that it was intended to provide, because now as developers, we have to take on significantly more risk in these projects. And whenever you add risk, the reward has to be higher because we need that margin in order to account for all these potential problems. And so if you want to reduce the risk, maybe we should have these processes streamlined out. And a law like this is extremely difficult for us to actually comprehend. The amount of time and due diligence we've got to do to go back in time and look through all these tenants is extremely cumbersome. And we're probably thinking, you know what? Unless this deal's a grand slam, I'm going to go to another state to build. And that's for that very reason why you're seeing a lot of projects in California sitting on the sidelines for this very reason. There's also other potential considerations, which we'll talk about in later videos, such as ULA. There's a massive transfer tax that was passed a couple years ago that is absolutely slowing down the housing market. And this SB8, and then we've got other additional tenant protection laws. So it's getting more and more difficult to build in Los Angeles and in the state of California overall. Hopefully they will see the results of this, they being the government, and start to hopefully implement policies that are a little bit more streamlined and or more promotive of housing, but we're gonna have to wait and see. So if you're in the middle of a development and you find yourself potentially dealing with an SB8 issue or other sort of regulatory issues around your project, then feel free to reach out to us and we'll be more than happy to guide you through it, as we have significant experience and we've dealt with the heartaches around these particular laws as well. So thanks so much for watching and look forward to seeing you in our next video. So make sure to like and subscribe to our channel for all the content related to real estate investment and tax saving strategies.